just humans are Darwinian malware, about how it would be best if humans didn't exist, given the amount of suffering we cause. I don't go down this route. I argue the case for genome reform.
And so what do you mean by this genome reform?
Essentially, natural selection doesn't optimize for happiness or well-being or kindness. So all kinds of nasty human behaviors, thoughts and feelings, from jealousy, aggressive warfare, sexual coercion, they were adaptive in the ancestral environment. We're only here because some of our ancestors did terrible things. And I think we need to edit our genetic source code, devise a new signaling system, replace the traditional pleasure pain axis with all its horrors with a pleasure super pleasure axis. Life should be based on gradients of intelligent bliss. And if that sounds a bit sci-fi, it's worth studying today's hedonic outliers. Just as tragically some people go through life animated by gradients of ill-being, there are a few people, like my transhumanist colleague Anders Sandberg, who says, yes, I do have a ridiculously high hedonic set point.
And the first thing that comes to my mind, at least, is isn't some amount of suffering good?
Suffering, mental and physical pain can be instructive. The question to ask is not whether it can sometimes be instructive or have a functional role, but rather whether it is functionally indispensable. And if you look at our intelligent machines, I've been as blown away by the Transformer revolution as anyone. But essentially, machines can now cognitively outperform humans in most domains, and they can do so without the ghastly raw feels of suffering. One, which I touched on just now, was information sensitive gradients of bliss. The other is offloading various functions to smart prostheses, and they're not mutually exclusive. However, some people don't want to become cyborgs, so we could just aim for information sensitive gradients of bliss. I stress it's a bit of a mouthful. The information sensitive, the dips, so to speak, can play the functional role of suffering, but without the nasty raw feels.
So it's like if we had the suffering, but replaced the actual feeling of suffering with some other mechanical signal, like say like a tapping on your hand or something like that.
Yes, I mean, one possibility would be, yes, the cyborg route that, if your hand were on a hot stove, essentially it was automatically withdrawn by a neuroprosthesis. Presumably, one would want some kind of manual override so you didn't feel you'd lost control of your body. Antinatalists would say it is not morally justified to create immense involuntary suffering, which is what one is doing by bringing new life into the world. I very much respect this view, but not having children simply imposes selection pressure in favor of being against being child free. So the future belongs to life lovers. I focus on essentially trying to persuade prospective parents that this is the right thing to do. Already now in the United States, there are embryo screening companies, but their focus tends to be on IQ, the standard measure of general intelligence. But I think we need a happy baby company which focuses on subjective well-being. I give this, the example of today, pleasure pain axis stretches from, this is schematically, -10 to 0 emotionally neutral experience to +10. And essentially, by calling for a more civilized signaling system, I'm saying that we should ratchet up hedonic range and hedonic set points. And it's possible to have, let's say, a 70 to a +100 civilization. And so in one sense, there's an immense gulf between the +100, which is inconceivably sublime, and the lower depths of the +70. But that +70, the hedonic floor that of a future civilization surpasses our hedonic ceiling. And as a civilization, I think we ought to be ratcheting up hedonic range and hedonic set points. People would probably be more prone to challenge authority and become active citizens. This is the opposite of the Huxley Brave New World objection, in which Soma, does anyone ever say, feel extremely happy, but my life feels empty and meaningless? I mean, by its very nature, intense happiness feels extraordinarily meaningful. I mean, take Dostoevsky, who had ecstatic epileptic seizures, and Prince Michigan. I mean, he says, I would give my whole life for this one instance. Intense happiness feels extraordinarily meaningful. One can imagine well-being like MDMA, ecstasy. People, sadly, the effect is short-lived, but people who take MDMA, popularly known as ecstasy, experience not just intense pleasure, but intense love, empathy, kindness, and warmth. And one possibility for civilization is giving people the option of being in lifelong MDMA-like states. The only way that we're ever going to be able to understand consciousness, I think, is to pursue I'm very cautious when it comes to urging people to explore, because dark Darwinian minds have such nastiness, darkness lying within, and the effects of psychedelics are extremely unpredictable. If one listens to people who have taken psychedelics,
A lot of people in Gen Z are very interested in psychedelia. Why do you think that might be?
essentially, it is absolutely fascinating. You know, the existence of realms completely beyond everyday consciousness. And anyone who is intellectually curious is going to want to find out. And arguably, many people would say, I go too far with phasing out predation, getting rid of suffering in nature. The problem of predation has recently gained a certain traction. This academic paper published on ending predation. There is a small group of actors who focus on the topic. I think one can be pretty dogmatic that, all involuntary suffering is evil.